I think we're live. We're live. Hi,
Are we?
and we are. I'm pretty sure. Hi,
Okay.
hi, and welcome to Speaking from the Center. Do not adjust your set. Uh, I know it says
It,
that we're on the Bin Podcast channel, but we are a part of the Bin Podcast now.
yes.
So I am not Mikey Famine, and that is not Chartan.
Thank God.
But I am Tim, and that is Nolan, and
Hi, I'm Nolan.
this is our show, Speaking from the Center. Put the little thingy down there. So we are coming to you live from Twitch and Twitter.
Yeah. Ooh, Twitter.
Yeah,
I remember when Twitter started. I've never had a Twitter account.
never ever.
Ever. Ever.
I have like four, and only one of them I use.
Yeah.
There is
I
a speak.
remember. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say there is a Speaking from the Center Twitter that I have to start using again, but I only use my like main Twitter, which is just my name at Tim Bristol, and it's really for like getting into all the like local politics stuff that I do. Like that's it.
Mm. Okay.
But
Well, that's.
yeah, I mean, I try to avoid all of the Twitterness, all of the random hatred on Twitter.
Yeah, that's pretty much all Twitter is at this point. I remember I was out at a bar. I was in my mid 20s when Twitter first started, and everybody I went out to the bar with was on Twitter, and they were all tweeting at each other while we were at the bar together, and I was just sitting there going, I don't understand. One, couldn't you just text each other and achieve the same result?
Yeah, yeah.
Two, you're all sat at the same table.
I mean, yeah, I mean that's what social media in general, right?
I mean, some of it. I mean, Facebook, despite the great evil it represents, is still functionally useful.
Yeah. Although it Mark Zuckerberg is a great evil.
Oh, yeah, no, him and his whole everything he's created.
Yeah, it's all bad.
Oh man. Ugh. Crap.
So today, just like every other week since this started, we're going to talk about the war in the Ukraine
Nice.
because we hate ourselves
I mean, yeah,
a little bit.
that's true. I don't know what that has to do with this, but us hating ourselves has nothing to do with why Russia invaded the Ukraine, other than, the obvious what a time to be alive sort of nonsense.
Oh yeah, what a
Oh.
time to be alive.
Yay.
So the Russian military has still not taken the capital of Ukraine.
Correct.
Um,
Ukraine.
yeah, the Ukrainian
Uh,
military is holding out as long as they possibly can, and
yeah, and the fact that the government has not only basically emptied their stores of weapons and given it to everybody and anybody who wants it, they've also released a large number of non-violent criminal offenders and said, "Here's some guns. Go to the front."
yeah, there's been a large, I don't know what to call them, militia created. It's about
Mobilization.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's about like somewhere between like 50,000 and 100,000 people that have come from all over the Ukrainian citizens that have come back to Ukraine.
Oh, the Foreign Legion.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like 50 to 80,000 strong now, made up of Ukrainians from all over the world and other just veteran fighters who were like, nope, we got to stop this Russian bullshit now.
The Ukrainian Olympic athletes, as soon as they were done with the Olympics, joined the military. Even the mayor of Kiev, who is apparently himself like a rich guy and a popular dude in the country, he's like, let's go fight the Russians.
Yeah, yeah. And what they need now, more than anything, is fighter jets, and Poland is trying to give them to them.
Yes, the MiG
And
29 fighter jet.
they just do not seem to know how to make this handoff. Because the U.S. is like, no, Russia could construe that as an act of aggression and use it to start a war with us. And it's like, they're looking to do that anyway.
Yeah,
Actually, I
right.
don't think that's true. I think the Russians want to the West to not get involved, but are terrified that things will escalate to where the West could get involved.
Yeah, and the West is terrified to be involved because Russia or Putin specifically keeps saying if the West gets involved, then there'll be nuclear weapons happening.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, but that's the funny thing is the Russians won't want us involved.
Yeah, they
They're
don't.
they're they're waving the nuclear sword to keep us from getting involved, but they are going to make damn sure that we don't have a pretext to like, oh, we gave these jets to the Ukrainians and you blew them up on the tarmac in Poland. That's an attack on Poland. Like they don't want that because if it escalates to that, then it's like, well, shit.
Yeah, yeah.
The
Um,
Russian logistical system has just failed fantastically.
yeah, I heard that the Russian military ran out of reserves of fuel, like just completely. They ran out of reserves of fuel, and that's why that 40-mile long convoy is just sitting there.
So actually, I learned a bit about this. The way the Russian logistical system is set up is there are two types. There's a push and a pull system, right? The US and a lot of the Western countries use a pull system for supplies, and where a military formation is able to pull supplies to itself as they're needed. So logistics is pulled forward by the combat units.
Right,
As they fight, as they move, they go, we need fuel, we need ammunition, and this is what we need. And the logistical train is set up to supply them to so they pull the logistical train behind them as they move forward, pulling supplies to them.
okay.
The Russians don't do that. They use a push system where they organize and set up what supplies, what formations are going to need for a given period of time, and then let that push the military forces forward.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
So they had a specified amount of time they had to use fuel in.
They organized fuel supply and ammunition depots and other things to be used over a certain predetermined period of time.
I see.
And then basically it's a so the pull system is very flexible, right?
Right, yeah.
As a unit needs supplies, it can pull those supplies to it.
But the
The
push
push,
system doesn't seem
it's a
very
little,
flexible.
it's not very flexible. It's based on timetables. It's based on achieving X by Y time period. You have enough fuel for 48 hours. Go.
Right,
Fuel and supply for 48 hours. You should be done by then. After that, they have a priority list of who will get what supplies to do what when.
right.
But it's all done from the top down. It's very centrally executed.
So obviously their timetables have not worked out.
Well, everybody, Russia itself, and every single foreign analyst believed that the Ukraine would fall within 48 hours.
Right,
Either the Ukrainian resistance wouldn't be that strong, or the Russian offensive would just be that devastating and shocking that it would shock the Ukrainians you know, into not being able to respond, into immobility, and they would be in Kiev in 48 hours. When that didn't happen, it basically royally screwed up the Russian push system. The biggest issue is the way Russian logistics work, and why they work so well within Russia is because I think out of 20,000 different rail lines within the country, 20,000 are owned by the state, with 1,000 being operated independently.
okay.
So the central government has control over this rail network, and they're able to use it to move their troops wherever they want. That's why, between a month from like November to December, the Russians went from 50,000 troops along the Ukrainian border to 100,000 troops along the Ukrainian border.
Right.
That's, very impressive. The problem is once you start getting away from those railheads, each Russian combined army, which is the highest level of military organization within the Russian command structure, these Russian combined armies that have tanks, infantry, artillery, have one designated logistics brigade.
Okay.
And it's just not enough. They don't have enough trucks, is what it comes down to. They have one designated logistics brigade per combined army.
Okay.
And within that brigade, there are battalions of engineers and people who are able to do amazing things with rail lines and clearing roads and all that stuff. But they have to support an entire army, which is multiple divisions.
Right.
And they just don't have the logistical support to do what they need to do. And this is nothing new. This has been Russia's logistical model since, I don't know, once they really unfucked themselves in the Second World War.
Okay. So after the purge of the military.
After the defense of Moscow in 1941, the
Okay.
Russians, that's kind of when they really unfucked themselves. The and the system was created by Marshal Zhukov, Grigory Zhukov. His famous saying was, "Amateurs think strategy, professionals think logistics."
All right. I mean,
And
yeah.
he did what and he's not wrong,
Yeah.
but in their interpretation of it, it was, we're going to mount an offensive. Here's what we need to do that. And our offensive can only push as far as our logistics can reach, and then they have to stop until we can catch back up.
Right.
And that was the nature of warfare back then. World War II was fairly modern, but also, horses were like used in math. So it wasn't that modern. And and Soviet logistics beyond that point were built upon this sort of, we build up the logistics, the army pushes to where it can, then it stops, and we bring the logistics back up. And then that pushes them forward again. During the Afghan War, that was one of the single biggest problems. The Soviets were able to amass huge forces to the border and move troops in and out along the rail lines within Afghanistan, no problem. But anything else beyond that, and they didn't have the supply. Troops would go without food, without ammunition. Things would fall apart very quickly.
Right.
So it's clear that while the army has modernized and revamped itself in a lot of ways, those major faults that were still there, that were there during the Afghan War, are, oh, I broke it. We're still there. Sorry, I grabbed this thing and it broke, and I'm like, oh, I didn't want to do that. They still are suffering from the same logistical Achilles heel that they had during the Afghan War.
So, I mean, didn't anyone think after the Afghan war, hey, maybe our logistics need to be rethought?
I mean, let's be honest. The last Soviet troops pulled out of Afghanistan in what, like 1988, 1989?
Yeah, but I mean,
And then the Soviet Union collapsed like 2 years later.
but in the last, like, let's say 30 years, didn't anyone in the Russian military command say, maybe what the West is doing with their logistics might be a better idea?
No, because it wouldn't necessarily work. Because, well, for two reasons. One, it wouldn't necessarily work in Russia, and because they don't have the infrastructure for it.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the Soviet military at the time was poised in forward striking positions across Eastern Europe.
Right.
You know, um, and all their models and things. They used the scientific method during the Cold War for their military tactics. Everything was based around that. And it didn't work in Afghanistan, but Afghanistan's limited roads, not a lot of rail network,
Right.
rugged, difficult terrain. It was the exception.
But
You
then
know,
they're having the same problem, I guess, in what is a modern country in Ukraine, where they have roads and they have a rail
Right.
system.
Yeah. Yeah. And now it's more glaringly obvious. I mean, look at their military operation in the only other really relevant one would be Georgia in 2008. The Russians fucking wrecked them in a matter of hours.
Right.
They were on the doorstep of Tbilisi, the nation's capital, in a very short period of time. Ukraine, the Georgian military was shattered, and if the Russians had wanted to, they could have rolled right into Georgia,
Right.
taken Tbilisi, set up a puppet government, and that was it.
Is it no? All right. So then, is there a problem that the Ukraine is such a large country, and the logistics supply lines run very thin at that point?
I think that's part of it. I think a big part of it is this. So the push system works for a defensive based military.
Right.
When your goal is protecting the territory of the Russian Federation, you can mass troops in a spot very quickly because of their control of the rail lines, and you can bring with that all the supplies they'll need for however long a period of time they need to hold a place. But when you go over onto the offensive into hostile territory in such a large area and meet such stiff resistance that you weren't expecting. I mean, basically, yeah, the Russians thought 48 hours, we're in and out.
Yeah.
Let's make sure we have enough supplies for at least 3 days just in case.
Right.
Um, and when those ran out, I mean, Russian troops were going without food. They started looting the countryside.
Yeah, I heard that they were looting like Ukrainian supermarkets,
Yeah, they didn't
and
have anything to eat.
I mean that's crazy.
They had enough supply for 72 hours.
And I heard that Ukrainian farmers are starting to collect abandoned Russian tanks.
Yes, and the government says that they don't have to pay tax on that. All Russian military equipment captured by Ukrainian citizens is tax exempt.
And at this point, they've captured enough tanks to make themselves a sizable armor brigade.
Yeah.
They could have their own. They could have their own column of tanks at this point.
Well, yes. They just need to get the fuel for it. Same problem. I mean, the initial phase, the Russian attack was, pretty well organized. Massive rocket and artillery bombardments all
Yeah.
over the place. Russia's special armed services, attacked Odessa, Mariupol, and the Kiev airport, along
Right.
with carrying out airstrikes. Nobody expected the Ukrainians to have the forces or the will to do what they did. The Ukrainian special reaction brigades, they're called, are highly mobile, highly trained forces, counterattacked every place the Russian special forces struck and pushed them back.
Yeah.
They took the airport in Kiev, and within a few hours, the Ukrainian forces had counterattacked and retaken it. Nobody thought they could do that.
Right.
Nobody inside Russia, and quite frankly, nobody outside the Ukraine thought they could do that either. Everybody was kind of like,
Well, one of the initial battles that was interesting was you were talking about the airport. The Russians took it, then the Ukrainians took it back, and then the Russians tried to take it again and couldn't.
yeah, yeah. Nobody really thought that the Ukrainians would put up the resistance that they have. I mean, it's not inevitable, you
Right.
know. It won't go on forever.
Well, eventually they'll get worn down, and the
War of
Russians,
attrition.
yeah, and the Russians do have, they have the military advantage when it comes to the amount of tanks they have, the amount of troops they have, the air
Yeah.
superiority. Uh, you know, I heard that in the last couple of days, 4 or 5 Russian jets got shot down, but it's only a matter of time before there aren't any Ukrainian jet fighters left,
Unless they get them from Poland
unless they get them from Poland.
or somewhere. Um, but
Suddenly,
yeah,
they just
that's
get a mysterious shipment of fighter jets with the American logos taken off.
you can't prove those are ours.
So they get a bunch of like F-14 Tomcats that have been decommissioned for years and years, and a
Yeah, I mean the Ukrainian
aircraft
pilots, you
carrier.
need to get them stuff that they know how to fly. You can't put them in an F-22. They won't know what the fuck to do. Is this the radio? No, that's the ejection button. Don't press that.
Well, maybe they should give them all the F-35s that the military was trying to perfect over the last 10 years and can't because they randomly set on fire. And be like, listen, 10% of these jets are going to explode, but the other 90% you can put up a good fight with.
You know that wouldn't deter the Ukrainians. There's this wonderful story from the Second World War during the Battle of Britain where the two big fighter planes that the British had were the Spitfire and the Hawker Hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hawkers were like these nightmarish, like tight turn, make you black out from how fast they'd go fighter jets that no, or not fighter jets, fighter planes that
Yeah.
nobody could really handle. And they were like, what do we do with these planes? We've got a bunch of them. The Spitfire is great. This Hawker Hurricane thing, though, scary to fly. Somebody went, give it to the Polish pilots, all the Polish exile pilots. And sure enough, they were like, we get to fight Germans? Sure. Get in the thing and go nuts with them. You want these? They're pretty modern. About 10% will blow up and burst into flames for no reason. Yeah, we'll take them. Give
Yeah,
them.
we'll take them.
We'll take them. We'll wait. We'll
Yeah,
make it work.
yeah.
Make it work for us.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, the other thing I heard that was interesting was that, like I said, there's a lot of Ukrainians who were living outside the country who came back to fight, and they now have like you said, a sizable foreign legion to defend the cities.
Yeah, 50 to 80,000, and more is streaming in. Not all of them. Not all of them are Ukrainians.
Yeah.
Like there's another couple tens of thousands of just foreign volunteers who have gone over to fight in defense of the Ukraine.
So, like, what what do you think Russia's thought is at this point? Like, what are they gonna do? I mean, yeah, they're gonna fight their way to Kiev, and their goal is to take the city. But I've heard that somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 Russian soldiers have already died.
I mean, you know history as well as I do, but
Yeah,
that's that's not so bad. I mean, it ain't Finnish level bad yet. This they haven't even gotten close to the Winter War era, so you're
no, no,
fine.
they haven't.
Two
But
to 5,000. What's that?
I mean, they're gonna start taking on more casualties as war happens. But what is going to be the domestic response from the Russians to Putin after so many soldiers have died?
I mean, that's up to them, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's how united are they in opposition? How united can they be in opposition? Is anybody in a position of power going to try to be like, no, this is stupid and challenge? I mean, this could. I think Putin went into this thinking, like most of the rest of the world did, within 48 hours, the Ukraine will put up a good fight, but they'll be beaten. This conflict will be over, and then we've readjusted the balance of power in Eastern Europe.
yeah,
Um, and that's not what's going to happen. Now it is going to be a slog and a grind that Putin and Russian pride will not allow or abide to end in anything else than the fall of Kiev and the toppling of the Ukrainian government.
but the Ukrainian people at this point, like, they're going to form a resistance even after the government's fallen.
Oh God, yeah. No. And whatever elements of the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian government will either go into exile or move just further to the west and closer to Poland and Romanian borders and continue to struggle and
Yeah,
fight.
yeah,
Um, yeah, it's a real Afghanistan 2.0 for the Russians. Um, the question is, are the Russian people, is the Russian power structure strong enough to stop this fight?
yeah,
Are they strong enough to stop it and do what needs to be done? Essentially, at this point, if the Russian people have had enough, and if the Russian power structure has had enough, and the only reason that this is dragging on is because of Putin, do they have the power and the stability to remove somebody like Putin from power? Can they do it? And Putin's not been doing anything to make himself any friends with the way he's been treating
yeah,
those other members of the government, publicly shaming them, yelling at them in televised things like,
yeah. He's definitely not making any friends with the other Russian government officials. But
Now, the problem is how like legitimate are those people, or are they
yeah,
just lackeys and rubber stampers? You know?
yeah. Well, I mean, so, and this is going to be the main topic of the episode. Russia is not a typical country when it comes to politics, and they are,
Yeah.
and they don't have a typical power structure. Uh, uh, they have basically Putin at the top, and then all the oligarchs that support Putin, and then everybody else.
Yeah.
And apparently, that has been Russia's power structure in one form or another since what was it, the Mongol invasion?
Basically, since hilariously enough, since the destruction of the Kievan Rus,
Yeah,
because believe it or not, Kiev was the center of the Russian world for a long time.
which is interesting, and I suppose a bit of historical context for why Putin wants to take it so badly.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, so the big thing is that Ukraine itself, so the first big state in the area we think of as Russia, the first like important major historical entity is the Kievan Rus. And you can even hear Rus, Russia, that's where the word comes from.
right,
It was Riki the Rus, who was actually a Viking. Um, well, because the Viking longboats, sailed all over Europe, but the big thing that gave them their advantage was they'd sail down the rivers.
right,
So you could take a Viking longboat from Norway to England, and then sail halfway up the Thames at the same time. And that's what they did. The rivers in Russia were the main networks by which communication and trade and travel took place. Because fuck, you weren't walking through it.
right.
Um, and the Vikings were like, "Yeah, let's freaking sail down these rivers and see what we can find." And one of them set up shop at the the Donets, I think it's called, or the
Yeah,
Dnieper.
I think it's the Donets.
What's the river by Kiev? I can't remember if it's the Donets or the Donbass or
It might be Donbass. I mean, that's. But yeah, um, man, what is the name of that river?
Dnieper.
Oh, okay. We were close. We were close.
We were almost there. The Dnieper River, and he set up shop, and it became this big kind of power in the region. Lush farmlands all around. They adopted the Eastern Orthodox form of Christianity and tied themselves in commercially and culturally with the Byzantine Empire.
Yeah.
They were the heart of Russian culture and language and religion until the Mongols showed up. And Kiev made the mistake of resisting.
Yes, they did.
And the Mongols went, "Stop resisting!" and annihilated them. Reports from the era say that like heaps of human remains were found in the surrounding countryside for decades after the Mongols sacked the city.
Right.
The power and the concentration of all that stuff that was in Kiev just vanished overnight.
So, and in regards to the Mongol invasion, um, they the Mongols as a culture were very much a nomadic tribe and used their nomadic strat their nomadic abilities to basically transform the cultures of everywhere they went. I was gonna say
Well,
strategy, and I couldn't say it right.
strategy.
Strategy.
Um, the weird thing about it is that everywhere nomadic tribes went throughout history, they would move out, they would conquer, they would take over land, and then they would just sort of adopt
Right.
the trappings of the people they conquered and kind of over time, over a very short period of time, integrate into the
Yeah.
lands they had taken.
They basically assimilated into whatever culture they were taking.
Yeah, and part of the reason for that anthropologically, there's a fucking $4 word for you. Um, which is not to be confused for arthropologically, which is when you have an exterior or chitinous shell. Uh,
So they were arthropods, is what you're saying.
yeah, yes, no, lizard people. um, that's like the worst, like just the nerdiest joke I think I could. It's like the most sciency joke I could have made ever. Anthropologically speaking, one of the reasons why nomadic cultures tend to get assimilated and subsumed into the lands they conquered is because so much of nomadic belief and lifestyle is tied to the lands they come from. And once you get outside of that land, you can't really do those things anymore. The Mongols are a great example. They had this religion that's called Tengirism. Tengirism. Um, and they didn't really spread it when they conquered. Like Islamic armies would conquer and they would spread and bring their religion and convert the place to Islam. Christian armies would, do the same,
Right.
middling, bits of success. Um, but the Mongols never did that, despite the massive empire they conquered, because so much of their religion was tied to specific places back in Mongolia. So it was like, well, yeah, you can't because this river isn't here. So, and well, couldn't any river do? No, it has to be that river. Well, we graze our herds here, and here during this time of year. Well, why don't you do that here? I said, well, you don't have the same grazing land, so we can't do that. So a lot of them tend to get subsumed into the cultures. They leave some impression, some mark, but
Right.
the Russians didn't have this happen for some reason. The Mongols did not show up and go, okay, we're Russian now. Like, you know, it's like when they conquered China, they didn't become, Mongolian China. They became the new Chinese dynasty.
Right.
And they adopted and started doing things the way the Chinese dynastic system had for thousands of years at that point. When the Turkmens took over Iran, they just became the next Iranian empire. It wasn't
Right. But this didn't.
hell, even when the Ottomans overran the Byzantine Empire, they kept a lot of their structures intact and just said, it's a mosque now, good enough.
But this didn't happen to the Russian states. Well, at that point, they were states, right? They were like city states.
Yeah, there were a series of principalities and dukedoms that, oh, hello.
It's simply secular Dave,
Oh, hi, Dave.
friend of the show.
Um, Friend of the show. No, in a weird sort of twist, because the two centers in Russia at the time were Kiev and Novgorod.
Right.
And the Mongols could never conquer Novgorod. The Novgorod Republic had built large cities built out of stone. Um, and the Mongols just, they could never conquer the place. And Novgorod grew in importance as a result because it became a window for stuff to go out of Russia, or Russian goods to go to Europe and European goods to go into Russia.
Right.
So those were your only two. You had Kiev and Novgorod. Then you had the Principality of Muscovy, Smolensk, Ryazan, Tula, all these little city states and things that were basically told by the Mongols, hey, you're a prince of this city. You're going to collect tax and get us the plunder, for lack of a better word. So that's what the Mongols would do. They'd say, you have to pay us a tithe and tribute and plunder.
Right.
Like if a city surrendered to the Mongols would go, okay, everybody out of the city. We're going to go take everything of value. And then you can come back. So what they would do is they say, okay, we're going to leave. This is a tax collector. We're going to do that every so often. You just going to pay him and we're going to take it. And the Mongols outsource that in the case of Russia because it's just so much land.
Right.
With so few people. Everything is so sparse.
They outsourced it to the Russian princes, essentially.
Correct. Right. And so it's weird, because instead of and this is the Mongol system is very exploitative. It was very pro free trade, and they were very tolerant of different religions and cultures and things like that. Um, but at the end of the day, they had a predatory, extractionary model on the places they conquered.
Right.
And again, in this weird quirk, instead of the Mongols adopting Russian things and eventually mixing in and just kind of becoming the new Russian states, the Russians started to pick up weird Mongol habits. Like they didn't adopt the Mongol like tribal system, but they started adopting other things because the Mongols were like, "You're in charge now. Do what we tell you to do. Because if you don't, we're going to come and sack your city, kill you, your family, and everybody in the city."
Right. So didn't they like start taking like Mongol military tactics?
Yeah, basically they went, "We'll recruit large cavalry armies, build our cities out of wood, and whenever somebody attacks us, we'll burn our cities, trash our own farmlands, and say, 'Come get us,' and harass them from horseback."
And haven't they been using those tactics since like World War II?
They've been using those tactics since the Mongols. There's 250 years they were under Mongol rule.
Right.
And in that time, Russia just didn't move in step with the rest of Europe. There were major socio political developments in Europe at that time that Russia just missed. Feudalism, one of the
All right.
cornerstones of European development, in where peasantry worked the land of a lord in promise of protection. It's basically a nationwide protection racket.
Right.
Um, there's debate that Russia ever went through the feudal system
Right.
because that wasn't how things were done.
And they never had the follow up to the feudal system, which was somewhat organized labor, because they also didn't experience the plague the same way that Europe did.
That's right. Because place was so sparsely populated. I mean, the plague still hurt them, but they went, no, now we have less people. We have to tie them to the land. That's
Yeah.
when serfdom really started in earnest. I mean, it had always existed, but as a formalized state institution of slavery, that's where it starts, kind of after the Black Death.
So they never really formed the political structures that Europe formed post feudalism when it came to how how the rulers dealt with labor and how they dealt with, well, essentially wages, because Europe had so few people to work the land, they actually had to pay people instead of the feudal system, and that created a more modern economy. But Russia really never went through that.
Yeah, Russia had the opposite. So the biggest thing for the Russians is basically in Europe, as those political developments took place, it's things like the Hanseatic League or the Holy Roman Empire, these institutions where mercantile prosperity was able to challenge central authority.
Right.
Um, these barons, these local lords, were able to raise armies to help defend their kingdoms, but they still had military power in their own right to challenge the central authority of the king. Um, and that was one challenge to absolute monarchy and central authority. The mercantile classes rising up and being able to purchase their way into power
Right.
was another check on central authority. And then, weirdly enough, the Catholic Church
That's
kind of
right.
became a counterweight to individual kings doing whatever they wanted.
Yeah, as long as the Catholic Church approved what you were doing,
You could
you
do
could
whatever you
yeah.
wanted, but if you ran afoul, so they kind of formed these three things kind of formed a series of balances and challenges to central authority. There was a force outside of the kingdom itself that applied all across Christian Europe back in the day in the form of the church that could challenge a monarch and say, "Hey, stop doing that or we'll back so and so," and tell them that you've lost God's love or
Yeah.
whatever. Then you had within the kingdom itself merchant lords and landed gentry who could also challenge and ultimately erode central authority.
And the Russian states didn't really experience a Christian church. They had The split off
They
from that was the Russian Orthodox Church.
the Russian Orthodox Church follows the traditions of the Byzantine Church in that it is, see if I can remember the fucking word, Cesio Papist.
Yes, that is the word.
Fuck, I should be on Jeopardy.
That's like
Um,
a $5 word. Cesio papist.
See, that's like Fenniscandia. It's one of those like words that only super nerds would know, you know? Cesiopapist means that the head of the church is appointed or chosen by the head of the state, by the monarch himself.
Right.
So, whereas in Europe, the popes were their own authority unto themselves and within the framework of the Catholic Church, whereas in the Eastern Orthodox churches, whoever's the king gets to pick who's in head of the church. This means that the church is actually subordinate to the monarch. So, where in Europe, the church formed a counterblock to kind of put an absolute monarch's power in check, in Russia, the church was a tool of the monarch to keep the state under his control.
Right.
Same thing with the lords. There were no landed gentry, only got land if the central authority of the czar said they did.
Right. And then they got the land to specifically have workers work it, and it sort of forced the landowners to be more brutal on the people who work the land because they were trying to make money from the land to give to.
Yeah. Well, so in Europe, we've given these examples of where central authority is even at the height, even when they were doing the whole, oh, absolutism is the way forward. Even then, the central authority of the monarchy was challenged at every step by something, whether it's the feudal lords, whether it's the mercantile rise of mercantile class, or whether it's the Catholic Church. Russia has none of these.
Right.
Russia goes straight from the Mongol overlords, who are exploitative and extractive in their treatment of the Russian people. They outsource it to the princes. The princes have to be as brutal as the Mongols to get what they want to appease the Mongol overlords. They have no checks or balances. They have no challenge to their authority. Because if anybody does challenge them, they go to the Mongols and the Mongols come and kill everybody.
Yeah.
And that's not like a, oh man, they really messed this place. Like, no, Mongol army wipes places off the map. This used to exist. Now it doesn't. This was a thriving, like freaking Khwarazm. Remember them? No, you don't. Ah, yes, the Sultanate of, what was it? Samarkand. Remember him? No, you don't. And the Mongols made sure of it. So this is the power that the Russian state, comes up in, and up until Ivan III and his destruction of Novgorod, because Novgorod was in step with the rest of Europe.
Right.
They had the Veche, which was a council of nobles and merchants who would vote for a prince among them. And while the prince had authority, he was kept in check by the Veche and the mayor of Novgorod and the other city states. And they were developing more online. And then the duchy, I think they were by that point, of Muscovy storms in, massacres the leaders of Novgorod, takes all their merchant and landed gentry, ships them out into the depths of the Russian plain, and steals everything of value
Right.
in very Mongol fashion, and essentially destroys this one element of Russian society that is developing in step with Europe.
And then that brings us to the early Russian Empire.
Yeah, well, you can kind of see how in Europe, the monarchs, despite having all the power that we like to think they had by today's comparisons, they didn't really. They were challenged constantly.
Right.
They were absolute monarchs, but you know they were never really absolute monarchs. They had to give up power, whether it was to the Catholic Church or whether it was to the landed gentry or the merchant class. Like, there was always a challenge. Whereas in Russia, after the Mongols were gone, there was nobody to stop them.
Right. Yeah. The czars could do basically whatever they wanted.
the czars could actually do whatever they wanted. They were an absolutist state, and everything they did throughout their history reinforced that structure. Whether it was so, the biggest challenge was the up until Peter the Great. The biggest thing was that the landed gentry, there was no central authority
Right.
on how the various regions of Russia were to be governed. There was nothing written down. These guys kind of had free reign to do what they wanted.
Right.
And the other thing they had was an institution. I'm going to try to say the name right. The Zemsky Zabor, which was a council of nobles who got to approve the line of succession and, basically rubber stamp the czar's wars and whatever he wanted to do, and had the land to kind of do whatever they wanted. Peter the Great comes along, takes that away, and restructures how the country is run. And instead of shaking it up in a good way, he shakes it up in kind of a bad way, because back then the gentry could compete with each other
Right.
for various things. Peter the Great removes that. He says, no. Your land has to pay X amount. I'm going to restructure them into these dedicated areas. Your land has to do X amount, but it doesn't have to come from you. You just need to get me the money.
I can't imagine that ended well for anyone who didn't own land.
No, it didn't, because now it made the Russian nobles complicit, and not only that, but tied them into the extractive methods in which Russia had been run since the days of the Mongol. Only instead of going to the Mongols, it's going to Peter the Great. It's going to the czars.
Right.
What was left of the Russian nobility? When we say the Russian czars are at the top of the pile here, Ivan the Terrible, which I think was Ivan the Fourth,
I think so.
he basically enacted a reign of terror, persecuting and killing and dispossessing Russian nobility left, right, and center, and basically asked them permission to terrorize them, proceeded to terrorize them for a decade. And of the dozens and dozens of noble families across Russia at that time, only 9 survived.
Jeez.
So even here, the landed gentry, the nobility, even they can't do shit. The Tsar is able to basically bully and persecute them. Because he is at the top. The leader of Russia is at the top. He
Right.
can really do whatever he wants. Whether he's the Tsar deciding he's going to torture noble families, or he's Comrade Stalin, the head of the Politburo, and he's going to massacre whoever he wants within the Soviet system,
Right.
or he's Vladimir Putin and he's going to tell the oligarchs to do what he wants, or if you don't do what he wants, he's going to have you killed.
Right.
Or exiled, like the guy who runs Stoli.
So it sounds like the Russian political system, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a system built on power and corruption.
Absolutely. It's an absolute power, absolute authority figure at the top. And he can do whatever he wants. Russia is, I think I heard it put best, Russia is not a country of laws. Russia is a country of leaders,
Right.
of men.
Yeah.
And they can do whatever they want. The man at the top has absolute authority to do whatever he wants. When they were like, they don't know what Putin's assets are, that's because everything is his as far as he's concerned.
Right.
And if you don't give him what he wants when he wants it, bad things happen to you.
So why didn't the Bolshevik Revolution and the rise of the Soviet Union change that? Because wasn't communism sort of a power
Yeah,
sharing system?
it absolutely was. The early Bolsheviks, and that's why when I say Russia needs a Bolshevik revolution, I don't mean they need to go back to communism. They need something like Lenin's Bolshevik Party to come back, because the Bolsheviks created, yes, it was a uniparty state, but the Politburo and the, oh God, uh, trying to think of old names for things that, and the Presidium and the Politburo and the Supreme Soviet were supposed to be these mass collective representative bodies. Yeah, everybody had to be a Communist Party member to be in it, but at least the decisions being made were being made by groups of people.
Right. It was made by committee instead of one guy.
Correct. And it was supposed to be above the rule of just one person. Yeah, you'd have a prime minister or a premier or something. Um, and what happened to that was basically Joseph Stalin. Infighting between old Bolsheviks like Lev Kamenev and Grigory Zinoviev and Leon Trotsky, and a very smooth operator in the form of Joseph Stalin going, you know what? I'm going to take this no name position here of general secretary. And by basically having, they used to call him, what was it? Comrade Party Card?
Comrade party card.
Because in order to be a member, you had to show your party card.
Right.
And he was at the head of the apparatus that handed all those out.
Oh, I see.
So he used that to consolidate power under himself and turn the general secretary into the leader of the country, which was never something that was intended.
Right.
And once he did, he basically filled it with his cronies and went right back to doing what Russia had always done. In fact, the Bolsheviks did one thing that no other group in Russia has ever tried to do, and that was deal with Russia's 400 years of alcoholism.
Right. Oh yes,
Because
I remember this. Yeah.
yeah,
So
the czars. Go ahead if you
oh
remember.
yeah. So in order to make money and control the populace a little bit more, the czars found vodka as a cheap way to get the populace drunk and control them. The czars controlled all the vodka production, and they gave it out to the people, and they didn't give it out. They charged the people for it.
Yeah,
And
but everything. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, and basically they controlled the production of all the vodka, sold it to the people, kept them drunk, kept them working, and it was just another way for the state to exploit the people for money.
And keep them under control. It was a sinister system of a peasant who is drunk all the time on cheap, readily available vodka is too drunk to consider how terrible his situation is too drunk to rally and organize and protest and try to change things. He beats his wife into submission and he beats his kids to become alcoholics like he is.
Yeah, and
And
and and whenever the czar wanted to reward someone, he wouldn't give them land. He would give them a vodka distillery.
yeah, the right to produce vodka.
Yeah,
And the Bolsheviks, to their credit, came in and said, no more. They were a prohibitionist party. They know they couldn't do it all at once, but they tried.
right.
And they shut down the czar's vodka plants because it was a state monopoly. The czar had absolute control over it, and he could keep himself wealthy with all the vodka that was sold for cheap, and he could keep his people under control you know, like a
Yeah,
drug lord.
yeah,
And the Bolsheviks tried to put a stop to it. And then Stalin came into power and said, you know what? Let's put red stars on the bottle, call it the people's vodka, and start producing it and allowing it en masse again.
yep.
Because drunk peasants are, not going to challenge my authority as the supreme ruler of the Soviet Union. And it was just sort of all downhill after that.
Oh well, that brings us to the fall of the Soviet Union and the rise of the Russian Federation and the rise of Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. I
And
mean, go ahead.
I was gonna say, after who was the first president of Russia? Who was it? I forget his name.
Good old Boris Yeltsin.
Boris Yeltsin.
You want to talk about an alcoholic?
After Boris Yeltsin, it was Vladimir Putin's turn to be the president of Russia, and I mean he just went back to what was Russian tradition, and took all the power for himself, put all of his favorite oligarchs in his favorite places,
Well,
and
he didn't just put the oligarchs in position; he kind of created them,
well, yeah,
revamping the Russian economy and creating the petrol dollar,
yep,
or the petro ruble as they call it. a lot of people were able to enrich themselves off of that. And the way that he basically took the vodka plants and said, "Oh, these aren't state owned anymore. I'm going to privatize them and give them to the oligarchs."
Yeah. And he gave oil production to the oligarchs.
He
And
created that body around him.
yeah,
He set up the economic framework so that these select few could rise to the top of Russian society as a result.
and he started squashing dissent and killing journalists. And
Well, like Putin's a bad guy, obviously, but Boris Yeltsin was no saint. He's up there as one of the bloodiest rulers in Russian history.
oh yeah, for sure.
Well, in the 20th century specifically.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's number third on the list behind, Joseph Stalin and Tsar Nicholas II, I think, and then the third on the list is Boris Yeltsin. The wars that were fought across places in Russia after the breakup of the Soviet Union, specifically the Chechen wars, were very brutal.
Tons of Mine says all my favorite oligarchs. Great musical.
Could be, could be. Let's get what's his name on that? The guy who did Hamilton.
you
Sure,
want
he'll
you
come
want
up with some.
you want Lin Manuel Miranda to write a Russian oligarch musical?
I think if anybody was gonna, it'd be him. I mean, he was able to take a bunch of slave-owning Americans and turn them into quaint little songsters. So,
Well, we do have
who else?
we do have a question in the chat. This is from Simply Secular Dave. What are the chances that what Putin is doing now will make him vulnerable to another non-NATO nation in the not too distant future?
I mean, who? Like, who would actually go after them?
China?
I mean, I think unlike the Russians, the Chinese have learned that outward military force isn't the way to go. And while the Chinese certainly have that military might, their big thing is soft power. Will the Chinese use this to expand their influence into the independent Central Asian republics and wrest Russian influence away from those areas? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Will they use it to expand their economic influence and soft power in other places around the world while the West is distracted, squabbling over Ukraine? Absolutely. Will they use this to take down Vladimir Putin? No, he's a wonderful distraction.
Yeah, I think that the Chinese, and again, they reaffirmed their friendship with between Putin and President Xi. Just this week, a few days ago, they put out an article. The Chinese media was like, "Oh yeah, we're still cool with Russia as long as they don't do something too crazy." Like, you know,
And why wouldn't they be? What do they give a shit about Ukraine?
yeah. I mean, they don't
Again,
care.
it's a wonderful distraction for the Western world, which they consider Russia part of, to piss off while they do whatever they want.
Yeah.
Because if
Besides,
people are
I was gonna say,
focused in on go ahead. Sorry.
well, I was gonna say, besides China, like, I don't really know if there is another like non-NATO country that would really try to tangle with Russia in any way.
I don't think anybody else really can. It would be the Chinese, and they're just like, no, we're good. Go
Yeah.
ahead, squabble amongst yourselves. I'm just going to buy all of South America while you're not looking.
Yeah, right. We'll just buy all these ports here and
Well, it's what they did in Africa while we were busy fighting over in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Chinese just went in and slowly bought control and influence across most of, if not all, of sub-Saharan Africa. Hell, you know what the Chinese recently did? They sent their one of their top foreign ministry people over to Iraq
it makes
to
sense.
go witness the opening of a Chinese language school in Basra.
There you go.
Or not Basra. What's one of those northern Iraqi cities?
Is it Fallujah? Is that northern
No,
Iraq?
no. It's north of Baghdad,
Oh, I don't know.
like in the Kurdish areas.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I don't know any cities up there.
I can't. I used to know the names. I can't think of them now. But yeah, the Chinese just
Mine says
opened
Toronto.
that. that might be racist. I don't know enough about Canadian politics, but if that's a shot at their immigration policy, then damn. That might be the most controversial thing ever said on this show. And I made fun of Texas for almost losing control of a nuclear reactor. So,
Oh, speaking of which, did you see the Russian military attacked a nuclear power plant? How?
wait. Not so let's be clear. This is the second nuclear power
Yes.
plant the Russians have attacked, but it's the first one that's active.
Uh,
Because don't forget, they did fight a large battle over Chernobyl
yeah, that was one of
in
the
the exclusion zone.
first
All those
battles they
soldiers are
won.
dead.
That was
Yeah,
one of the
all
first
those
battles they
soldiers are
won. Oh my god.
yeah.
Yeah, they all have radiation poisoning.
They all have radiation poisoning and they're all going to get cancer in the next year. All of those people are dead.
I also heard that the Russian military cut power to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. You know, the power that's keeping all the reactors dormant. That's, keeping the water flowing
No.
through the reactors that are still
Yeah. What
active.
are any of them still active?
Well, the one that's damaged is still technically active. It has that concrete shell around it, but they
Yeah.
still have to pump water through it to keep it from spewing radioactive matter into the atmosphere. So, that's fun.
That's what's going to happen. The world's not going to end in a bang. The world's going to end when the Russians fuck that up and the whole world gets cancer as a result.
Oh, but yeah, that nuclear power plant that they attacked is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has 6 nuclear reactors, and it's not like a shitty Soviet nuclear power plant like Chernobyl was. It's a modern nuclear power plant that
And the Russians
supplies.
said, "Hey, I know, let's fling artillery shells at it."
and, I bet you they're like, oh shit, we set it on fire. Fuck, 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 fuck.
Yeah, I don't know.
What was I assume they were trying to take the power plant, and they fired a few rockets at it, and they were like, maybe that's not a good idea.
Were they? Were they though? Were they? Or were they just saying, "Fuck it, we're going out with a bang"? Or maybe it was a bunch of Russian conscripts who got jumpy and just started pushing buttons on the launch controls.
Oh yeah, by the way, Putin said that he's not using conscripts in the army that's in the Ukraine.
He's lying.
They've got to be conscripts, at least some of
They've
them.
captured a bunch of them. The Ukrainians, he's lying. The Ukrainians have captured them. They are 18-year-old boys who have been in the military for a couple of months to a year. That's
Yeah,
why they
and
captured that one boy and they gave him tea and food and let him FaceTime his mother because he
yeah,
was
I remember.
18 years old and he was in tears.
I heard that there was. I don't know how accurate my memory is of this, but there was a Russian, not general, but a higher up in the Russian military who was captured, and then he started giving interviews to the Western press about what is actually going on in the Russian military, and he's like, yeah, Putin has lost his goddamn mind. Nobody was told about anything until like a day beforehand, and that a lot of Russian military soldiers don't want to be fighting this fight.
Ugh. Well, we may be living in an era where finally, like two things that nobody ever thought was going to happen in our lifetime is going to happen. Ireland is going to unify into a single country,
Uh
and Putin's going to be removed from power in Russia finally.
huh. But yeah, I heard and I saw part of the interview too, and he wasn't a general, but he was like a colonel or a lieutenant or something, mid rank. And he
Right.
was he was captured by the Ukrainians and decided that he would spill the beans on everything that was going on that he knew about.
Yeah, and allegedly, yeah, I don't know. I hadn't heard that story. The thing I heard was a Russian general leading from the front was recently killed.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, in combat against Ukrainian forces. So, you know, go Ukraine.
Once again, the Russian military is terrible at logistics, and at this point, their strategy must be to get to Kiev at all cost.
I mean, and that's difficult because again, the Russian military is not set up to fight offensively. It never really has been. Every time they try to mount aggressive offensive, this is what happens. Their fallback method is light everything on fire, destroy our cities, and run inland.
Yeah.
They've been doing it since the Mongols.
It'd be hilarious if they started like capturing cities and then setting them on fire as they left, and
Yeah, yeah.
suddenly they're on
Oh my!
horseback again.
They won't run out of fuel.
Oh, and I mean, we had this conversation off air, but it seems that a lot of the military vehicles they're using are not modern. It seems like they have a lot of Soviet era armored personnel carriers and T-80 tanks,
They
and
they have huge stores of this, so it makes sense to. So here's the mentality, right? The Russians probably have maybe around 100,000 crack frontline could take down Western Army troops.
right.
Do they want to risk them in the Ukraine? Because once they use them, they don't have them anymore.
Hmm.
And that's a valid military like consideration. Um, if we use them for this, then we won't have them later if we need them.
Right.
So they thought, well, we'll just mass what we have in these few combined armies, and we'll fling it against the Ukrainians. They'll break in 48 hours, and we'll be done. And if they had used the crack like cream of their military that they have been building up slavishly for the last decade and a half, that was probably what we saw used against Georgia. They might have succeeded. But then there was the problem of, okay, but if we use it and it gets all banged up fighting in Ukraine, and then the West attacks us,
Right.
what are we going to have to stop them? Like the Gulf of Bothnia up in the Baltic Sea is not that easy to defend, and a NATO strike force could easily, operating out of Estonia, force its way down and capture St. Petersburg in a day,
Right.
and that's going to look really bad.
But I mean, we are talking about they have a modern military main battle tank called the
Oh yeah,
T-100,
yep, and
which
that thing is terrifying.
yeah, a friend explained it to us that it has a kind of armor where it uses explosions to stop anti-tank weapons.
Yes, they went, if we, how do we fight explosions? Well, with more explosions. When things
Because
are fired at the tank, it's called ERA, explosive reactive
yes,
armor.
and the way it works is that when you fire an anti-tank weapon like one of those javelin missiles or something, it is a projectile that's being fired that's supposed to penetrate the armor of the tank and cause all sorts of havoc in the crew quarters.
Yep.
The armor sends out detects the incoming projectile and sends out an explosion to divert the projectile or bend it up in some way where it won't pierce the armor.
It helps counter its speed, removing the kinetic energy, and causes the solid state projectile that would hit to kind of bend or warp or move. So instead of
Right.
going straight in, it kind of goes whoop and bounces off the side.
So the
Is
Russian
is the
tanks have
hope.
made tanks that explode on purpose.
Man, Russia's just at the forefront of like wacko military tactics, right? How do we protect our tanks? What if we make them blow up before they get blown up? What? Oh no, we're at war. Quick, burn all our stuff, destroy all of our cities, and run. What?
Take that factory and move it to Siberia.
Yeah, don't fight to defend it. Move it that way.
Quick, everyone, pick up a brick. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what they did.
Yeah, and it's so prevalent in like the history of World War II in Russia that in I finally got Hearts of Iron 4.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember in Hearts of Iron 3 there's a thing that if the Germans get too deep into your territory, if they get close to Moscow, there's an event that happens like, do you want to move all production to Siberia?
Yeah.
And then it just happens.
Yeah. That's fun.
Tons of Mice says, Tim, that's not a tank, that's a spermicide.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, God.
Well, we spent an entire hour talking about the history of Russia,
Yep.
and I don't know about you, but I don't want to talk about Russia until next week.
That sounds good. Maybe by then the war will be over and Putin will be gone.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
could you imagine the Russian military mutinies on the border, turns around and tries to march on Moscow?
I mean that is the propaganda campaign in Ukraine right now. The Ukrainian military is putting out radio messages and all sorts of stuff saying, "Hey, Russian soldiers, you don't want to fight us. Go home. What are you doing here?" Like they're
I
basically
don't
saying like, "Hey, you guys were friends. You don't want to fight us. You're being told lies. Just go back home."
That's what I mean. What if they go, all right, sure, we'll go back home, but they don't go back home peacefully
Yeah, yeah. They go back home with the weapons they were given.
and say, hey, you know what? Maybe we should go have a word with Putin ourselves.
I mean,
And then we'll get to see what happens when a major nuclear power falls into civil war.
oh
That'll be
god.
fun.
Oh yeah, and they lose command and control over their nuclear weapons. Is that what you're saying?
Won't that be great?
There's
And the worst part is, for Ukraine, that's like the best case scenario.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, their best case scenario is that the Russian military decides, you know what, this isn't worth it, and then turns back east.
Yeah, mutinies and marches home.
Yeah.
Oh, what a time to be alive.
Sons of Mice says, in Russia, tanks explode themselves. What a country.
Absolutely. All right.
Let's
I
let's yeah,
let's wrap.
let's end this thing.
Okie doke.
I wanna thank everyone in the chat, Tons of Mice and Ollie and everyone else that's out in there. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like our show, I'll put the Patreon up here. Go to patreon.com/sftc and become a producer of the show. Like, well, I mean, Chartan is both technically and literally a producer of the show at this point. Um, but be a producer of the show. Give us some Patreon monies, and you too can be on maybe Speaking from the Center. I hope.
Yeah. Isn't that
Yeah.
appealing?
Also, go and like and subscribe to our YouTube. The links are somewhere. We have a Twitter that's at from_the_center. And like us on Facebook at facebook.com/sftc. Facebook.com/speak from the center. All one word. Also, as we are wholly owned by the Bin Podcast now, I'm obligated to say like and subscribe to all the Bin Podcast stuff. Subscribe to the Twitch and do all the things. Give out subscriptions to other people, your friends. Also, like and subscribe on YouTube and Twitter, which we are broadcasting on as well. And that's going to be it for this episode of Speaking from the Center. Be sure to catch us next week at 8 p.m. Bye bye.
Bye.
8 p.m. on Wednesday.